Hi, in this video we will see how to use deployment slots in Azure Web Apps. Let's start off by opening up PowerShell and logging into our Azure portal using the Azure CLI. Now we've logged into the Azure CLI. Next, let's create a few variables. The first one is group name. The second one, let's call it test app service. Let's call the third one a web app name, and let's call it test site Sunil Rav. And let's create one more variable. Let's call it staging slot name. The slot name would be staging. Using these variables, now it will be easy for us to create commands referring to these variables, so that we don't have to keep typing our names of the groups and app service names over and over again. First thing we will do is create a resource group. So I'm referencing the variable here. It will be called test group, and the location West US. This should be pretty quick. Once we do that, let's create an app service plan. We are going to use the text app service as the name. We plug in the variable name in the command and the group name, which we already defined before. Once that is done, then next thing we'll do is actually create a web app. This is the command. Just like before, we'll just reference the variables because we defined it earlier. So we are creating a web app with a web app name as test site Sunil Rav, the same resource group we used before and the same app service name we used before. This will take a minute to create. Once that is done, let's create a slot in this. Actually, before that, let's log into our Azure portal, go into our resource groups. This is the test group we created. Inside the test group, we see the site we created called test site Sunil Rav. Once we go in there, let's check out the deployment slots in here. Right now, by default, we only have one deployment slot called production. Next thing we'll do is create a deployment slot called staging. If you recall, we created a variable called staging before, and we'll just use that and plug it into this command. Once that is done, let's go back to our portal, refresh the page. Now we will see we have the staging slot in it. Let's click into the staging slot and see how our staging site looks. If you look on the right here, you say the URL is actually testsunilrav-staging.azurewebsites.net. Let's visit that and see what appears. You see a generic Microsoft Azure page. So here, let's see if we can deploy some code. Let's go back to PowerShell. So here's the command to deploy code. So we are going to deploy our code to our web app into the staging slot under the same resource group we used before. This is a demo site Git repo I have. I'm asking it to use the master branch and telling it to do manual integration as opposed to continuous integration. Let's just execute that. Once that is done, let's go back to the portal. Let's browse to the staging site again. This point, we see a different site. We see a generic ASP.NET Core site, which is basically the code which I have in the Git repository. Now, let's see if we can swap the code in the staging slot into the production slot. In order to do that, let's once again use a PowerShell. This is the following command. We are saying in an Azure web app deployment slot, we want to swap slot staging into a target slot production. Let's execute that. This will take a few minutes to finish. Once it is done, let's go back to the staging site. Actually, let's go back to the production site, go to the overview, and then browse. Here we've seen that we didn't explicitly push any code into the production slot, but we did a swap from staging to production. So whatever is in staging is now in production. Let's go back and see what's in staging. Here I'm going to browse, and I see that staging has now become the generic Azure web app page. That's because the production slot originally was this generic page. So when we did a swap, the staging went into production and the production came into staging. This is useful so that in case of emergencies, meaning in production slot, if they find a critical bug or something breaks, you can quickly swap back the old production back into the current production, so that the downtime is as low as possible. Anyway, in this video, we created a web app, deployment slots, and we saw how we can swap between various deployment slots to move code around. Thank you for watching.